My name is Magda. I'm a videographer, I work at America's Test Kitchen, and I have an insatiable sweet tooth. And while I'm not a pro, I've learned a few things about baking and dessert making since I started working here. Show-stopping confections may look intimidating, but if I can do it, anyone can. So let's do this together and make some dessert. A decadent tart is one of the most elegant desserts I can think of, and I love making them, but they can be fussy and the dough can be difficult to manage. Believe me, I know. But today I am making a chocolate matcha pomegranate tart, and though it may look fussy, it's actually a lot easier to make than it looks. It has a super pliable, buttery hazelnut crust, a creamy chocolate filling that doesn't require any cream at all, and a matcha spiked whipped cream on top that adds a pleasant, kind of grassy flavor that I actually love. It's such a fun way to incorporate green tea into sweets, and I can't wait to show you how I've learned to make it. So first things first, I'm going to start with the tart dough. And for that, I need one single egg yolk. So I'm just going to separate this egg over a little ramekin, place it in the bowl, and yep, I just broke it. I'm not starting over. So to that, I'm adding 2 tablespoons of heavy cream. I'm gonna give it a good whisk. This is a good time to mention that I have a 1/4 cup of hazelnuts already prepared. These have been blanched so they don't have skins, and I already toasted them earlier, so they're nice and fragrant. Add a 1/4 teaspoon of kosher salt and a cup of powdered sugar. All right, top goes on, and now I'm gonna process for about a minute. You can see I've got some butter waiting for me. That's 4 tablespoons of chilled butter that I've cut into 8 pieces. All right, in goes my butter. Just going to sprinkle it over the top. All right, top goes on. Process for another minute or so. And I'm looking for the mixture to become smooth and creamy. Now, I wouldn't exactly call this mixture smooth or creamy, but it is pretty pliable and cohesive. And when I press on it with my spatula, it starts to make a nice spread. So I think I'm ready to move on to the next step. With the food processor running, time to drizzle my yolk and cream mixture. Yep, I just did that. Be right back. Now that my egg and cream finally made it into the food processor, I'm going to process this mixture until it's smooth, which shouldn't take more than another minute. That's looking really nice and smooth. So I'm going to add my flour to the dough. That's 3/4 cup plus 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. And that's the last ingredient for this dough. Now last time, I'm going to process for just another 30 seconds until the mixture starts to look a little gummy. Like, it's not a ball, but it's not sand either. Just going to transfer it to my counter and corral it into a big ball. And using my hands, I'm just going to push and knead the dough ball into a round. Pushing and turning. I'm not using any bench flour at this stage, and I'm not having any issues with the dough sticking to my hands or the counter. It's really easy to knead. This is literally the reason I got into baking. It's just so incredibly satisfying. Anyway, I'm going to take my dough and place it in between 2 sheets of parchment. Just like that. And now with my rolling pin, I'm going to push the dough into a 12-inch, larger round. I don't like to roll backwards and forwards with the pin. I find that I have a lot more success when I just push outward in one direction. To make sure all the sides are even, I rotate the round after every few strokes. I've used this with pie doughs before as well, and I find that the end result is just a lot flatter and a lot more even. Alright, I've got a 12-inch round here. That's the perfect size for this tart, and now it needs to go into the freezer for a bit. I just inverted a regular old cookie sheet, placed it counter level, and then dragged the round by the parchment onto the upside down sheet. Now I can go into the freezer for about 15 minutes. After a quick 15 minutes, the dough should be nice and firm. I'm going to gently peel off the top layer of parchment. Now for a tiny bit of bench flour, because I'm going to bring out my rolling pin again. I'm going to use the parchment to guide the dough over the rolling pin. And once it's about halfway, or until I feel like I have enough leverage to make the transfer, in one semi-confident motion, I'm going to lay this dough round into the pan. Now, same principle here that I use for pie doughs. I'm going to pick up the lip of the dough round and just ease it into the bottom of the pan. And I can see there's a little tiny tear and a big crease from the parchment. This dough is so malleable that it won't be a problem to fix either of those. All right, last step, I'm going to take my rolling pin and make nice, neat edges just by rolling the pin over the sides of the pan. It's a really easy way to make your tarts look as profesh as possible. I don't know about you, this looks good enough for me. So back onto the rimmed baking sheet. I'm going to cover it with plastic because we're not ready to go into the oven just yet. This is going to go into the fridge for at least 30 minutes or up to 3 days in the fridge if I choose, but I'm really excited for the matcha part of this recipe, so I'm going to go with 30. Now, a very speedy 30 minutes later, my tart dough is nice and firm again. Before I can bake this needs one last treatment. I need to dock the bottom of my tart dough, or just poke a lot of holes in it. I'm aiming for 30 small holes in the tart dough. I like to use a fork. I space the docks as evenly as I can. Into a 350-degree oven for 25 minutes this goes. I'm going to leave the pan on the baking sheet and rotate the pan halfway through baking. While that's happening, I can get to work on the second layer of my tart, the chocolate. I need about 5 1/3 ounces here, and it's important to use chocolate bars that are 70% cocoa or higher. And not just because it tastes better, but a lower percentage chocolate will make the filling grainy as opposed to smooth and creamy. And to that, I'm adding a 1/2 cup plus 1 tablespoon of water. Into my water chocolate mixture, I have 3 tablespoons and a teaspoon of granulated sugar and a 1/4 teaspoon of kosher salt. Alright, so the best way to melt this chocolate is in a double boiler. So into a medium saucepan, I'm going to add just enough water so that it won't evaporate nor touch the bottom of my glass bowl as the water starts to simmer. Once it's up to a simmer, the bowl can go on top of the saucepan. And now, as quickly as possible and without neglecting my chocolate, I'm going to make an ice bath because the chocolate needs to cool immediately after it comes out of the double boiler. Back to the chocolate, continuously mixing with my spatula just to make sure the chocolate melts without scalding at the bottom of the bowl. I'm also aware that you can see my cameras in the saucepan, and you probably guessed that this isn't my kitchen. This happens to be where I get the best light, so that's where I am. I'm just going to submerge the bottom of the hot bowl of chocolate into the ice bath. I'm going to stir constantly. I'm looking for there to be a change in viscosity of the chocolate. I'm also monitoring the temperature to make sure that it gets between 75 and 80 degrees. It's probably like 110 right now, so this might take a little while. All right, 77 degrees, that's good enough for me. So now I can remove my chocolate from the ice bath without getting any water in the chocolate, obviously. And now once it's on the counter, I'm going to stir for about 30 seconds longer. And I can tell that the chocolate is a lot less runny at this point. Not too thick, but not too thin. My baked tart shell that I've already let cool on a wire rack for about an hour. Pretty straightforward here. Just going to pour my chocolate mixture into the tart pan and attempt to get as much chocolate into the tart pan as possible because I do have a penchant for eating chocolate before it gets into the final product. Now I'm going to use my spatula and spread this as evenly as possible. And I'm going to do this pretty quickly because the chocolate tends to stiffen as I work with it. I'm going to give this a few taps on the counter just to release any air bubbles. And now it can go back into the fridge for another hour or until it's set. In the meantime, I can get to that matcha whipped cream. All right, that's 1 cup of heavy cream, a 1/2 cup of powdered sugar, and yep, okay, almost forgot that 1/4 teaspoon of salt. All right, now time to whip. I'm going to start at low so I don't end up with powdered sugar all over the place, and then on high until I get to soft peaks. That looks pretty good. All right, 3 teaspoons of matcha. And I can be a little heavy-handed with the matcha, but I'm going to try to stick to 3 teaspoons here because it can get a little grassy. So trying to keep that ratio pretty exact. All right, I'm looking for stiff peaks here because eventually I'm going to try and pipe this whipped cream onto my chilled tart. I love how colorful this is. It's so green. The whipped cream is nice and fluffy. So to pipe this whipped cream, I need a piping bag, a piping tip, and a pint glass, which is all I had in the house for this purpose. I can take a scoop or 2 of my whipped cream, not all of it, because I don't want my hands to warm up the whipped cream as I pipe. So I'm just going to press it with my spatula into the bag. Time to unmold my chocolate tart from its pan. Now an offset spatula is really helpful here. I'm going to slide it in between the crust and the metal round. All right, finally, time to get creative. So I'm using a closed star piping tip today if you're interested. Now if I wanted, I could just as easily spread the whipped cream on top, add the pomegranates, and call it a day. But since I'm doing this on camera and I only have 1 tart, why not just go for it, right? My little trick is I like to hold my tip without moving it. After just a second, then I rotate the piping bag to create a tiny little rosette, or attempt to make a rosette. I think this is looking okay so far. I'm not a piping expert or a pastry chef, so please reserve your criticism for another time. Some rosettes look like swirls, some swirls look like rosettes. What's the difference? All right, 1 more teaspoon of matcha powder into a fine mesh strainer. I'm just going to dust the top I want it to look vibrant and green, and I also want to disguise any mistakes I made while piping, but I don't want the matcha to overpower the rest of the tart, so it's a fine line that I plan to walk. Alright, very last touch, some tangy, crunchy pomegranate seeds, just a little bit of fruit flavor for this really decadent tart. I'll be pretty liberal with these because I absolutely love pomegranates, and I don't buy them that often. I mean, I don't want to pat myself on the back or anything, but I think this turned out pretty okay. It's colorful, it's decadent, it's a little fruity, a little herbaceous. It's the perfect way to eat dessert. I highly suggest you give this a try, and let me know what you think in the comments. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time!